Vete Sodales. So let's talk about virtual assessment. But let's take a slightly unexpected approach. This is actually another one of those self assessments. You might want to go grab a piece of paper or something to take a couple notes. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, sometimes you just need a different approach. And I'm going to ask you guys to think about two things that may not seem to be connected. I just love this theme with the one square vessel there in the midst of all the nice, normal, round ones. How is it connected? But there are two things that I'm going to ask you guys to think about today that don't seem like they're connected, but they're going to help you solve, they may help you solve, a problem that you've been struggling with. So, what are they? One big problem you wish you could solve, and one teacher or professor that you would put on your bad teacher list. Huh? One big problem that you're facing now that you wish you could solve and you haven't been able to. One teacher or professor on your bad teacher list. So let me give you an example. Mine is too much to do and not enough time, right? Because that's kind of a universal problem for teachers, especially right now. All the things that you could do: preparing for class, developing assessments, grading them, actually working with students, meetings, all the other things that teachers have to do. And right away I thought of Professor X. Professor X was was a professor at my undergraduate college. He was not in my department, but he was in an adjacent department. And he was actually, it was the first class that I took, the fall term of my freshman year. It was Professor X's class. 8:30 in the morning on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays with Professor X. And he was not a terrible teacher, but I didn't like him, mainly because he didn't like me. Professor X was very proud that he had a PhD from Harvard. And Professor X felt that he was wasting his time and his talents on anybody whose parents, at least one of them, didn't have a PhD, ideally from an Ivy League institution. Well, neither of my parents had a PhD, so that was bad. I wasn't from the kind of place that Professor X wanted me to be from. I didn't have the kind of multiple generation academic background that he wanted, and so he just had this kind of cold and distant contempt. He never bothered to get to know me. And the one time I went into his office to talk to him about something, he was cordial, but you could tell he wanted me to get out of there. And the only thing I remember is this Harvard doctoral robe, which, you know, if you've ever seen one, they're crimson with the little black things. And it's hanging on a coat rack in his office, even though at my alma mater, faculty really only wore academic regalia for like opening convocation and graduation. They didn't wear them all the time. But Professor X kept his Harvard doctoral robe hanging right there in his office for the whole world to see. And it was like that robe was staring at me just as contemptuously as he was. Other than that, I mean, he knew his subject matter well. He was an engaging lecturer. Um, it was supposed to be a freshman seminar class, and we had pretty good discussions. It was an interesting topic. But the contempt. So I asked myself, if there's too much to do and not enough time, how on earth could something about Professor X help me solve that problem? You might want to pause the video for a minute, and you might want to think about, well, what's my big problem? How might my Mr. or Ms. or Dr. or Professor X, how might they solve, how might they respond if they were in the situation I was in? And I realized that Professor X, he wouldn't even see a problem because he was so convinced of his own value and importance. Now, he may have been a little bit overconvinced of his own value and importance with his, and he may have been compensating a little bit with the Harvard PhD robe hanging right there, and he didn't want to be called Dr. X because he said, well, at an institution like this, everyone should have a doctorate. I'd like to be called Professor X. That's my title. And I can hear him saying that almost 35 years later. And I remember thinking, wow, there's a whole bunch of things I don't know. But how would Professor X have approached too much to do and not enough time? Before I give you the solution, before I tell you what I think he would have done, which I'll do in tomorrow's video, I want you to think about your situation, the first unsolvable problem that comes to mind, and the first bad teacher on your bad teacher list, because we all have one, right, that comes to mind. And I just want you to ask, what would they do? Because it's such an off-the-wall question that'll get you thinking about things differently, and it might possibly start to begin to get you unstuck. But remember, guys, it does not have to be as difficult, complicated, and hard as it seems, and you really don't have to try to do it all alone. We all have this hero teacher story where we're supposed to do it all alone. We don't have to do it all alone. Even Professor X, I was stunned to discover this. He had friends. He had majors in his department who adored him, who thought he was the best thing ever. He was married, he had kids. So even Professor X didn't try to do it alone. And we don't have to try to do it alone either. So if you're thinking, now what? Remember, you can always send me a message on Facebook if you need help, or if you'd like to try that process. And all you got to do is just send that message. Find me on Facebook, and there I am, and there I am, and there I am. It's Justin.Schwam.3. And I'm going to look forward to talking to you guys soon. I'm going to look forward to hearing from you. And until I do, let me just say, Waleting Sodales.